It's March 11th, 2019. My name is Christine Musser, and I'm here today at the Cumberland County Historical Society. I will be interviewing Sam Gruber and Harold Butch Bricker. Sam and Butch are retired administrators from the Cumberland Valley School District. And Sam, I'm going to start with you sharing a little bit of background, how you ended up at CV. Just start back.
Well, I started my teaching career in the Mechanicsburg School District, and I taught there for 2 years. And one thing I wanted to do was I wanted to be a basketball coach. So after 2 years in Mechanicsburg, I was fortunate enough to get the head basketball job at Sesquanita High School. And after 1 year at Sesquanita, Cumberland Valley was hunting a basketball coach. And they went to a gentleman by the name of Russell Trimmer, who was the basketball coach at Middletown High School. And Russ had probably the most successful high school program in the area at that particular time. And when they asked about Russ's assistant, he said, what you ought to do is talk to Sam Gruber at Sesquanita. So after a lot of thought, because I really enjoyed my year at Sesquanita, I decided that I would take the basketball and a biology teaching job at Cumberland Valley. Back in those days, it was known as Cow Valley. And I coached basketball for 5 years, had some decent and good basketball teams. But after 5 years of coaching, then I went into administration. I think the thing that's noteworthy is I got to be a part of the origin of the school district and was in on knowing a lot of the people who were the very foundation and the start of the Cumberland Valley School District. I do remember that I lived in a Negley Park in Lemoyne, and to get to Cumberland Valley in 65, 66, it took me 15 minutes. There was one traffic light, that was at Route 15, and everything else was fields and maybe a racetrack, a couple bars, and a flea market on the way out to Cumberland Valley.
Okay.
I graduated from Shippensburg University in 1970. Was lucky to get a job at Camp Hill High School teaching sociology from 70 to 73. Fortunately, back then they had to make you had to go back to school to get permanently certified, so I got my master's in 73. I moved over to Cumberland Valley in 1973-74. I taught almost across the hall here from Mr. Gruber. He became my mentor. I learned a lot. In 1976, I went back to one of his alma maters. It was called Western Maryland. Now it's McDaniel College in Maryland. I think we both got our principal certification from there. And in 1978, I was fortunate to be hired as an assistant principal. And I served under a great man we both know, a guy by the name of William R. Pierce, who was probably the longest principal ever in the central Pennsylvania area for almost 26 years. Yep. So I was an assistant there till 90 or 91, and then Sam had already retired. I was fortunate to become high school principal. I think it was 91, and I served in that position till 97, and then I went down to the district office as assistant superintendent. I was influenced by this man. I was influenced by a great man called Harry Chapman, who was a head football coach, who actually brought me to Cumberland Valley, taught me so much about life, perseverance, endurance, honesty, integrity. And as Mr. Gruber said, took Cumberland Valley from Cow Valley to Cumberland Valley. And all of a sudden we started to win football games. And when I was at Carlisle High School in 1966, I say this humbly, but we beat Cumberland Valley 55-0. And then we turned the tables when I got there under Harry Chapman. I got into education like Mr. Gruber because I wanted to be a football coach. And I never became a head coach, but I had great years under Harry. Again, he taught me and so many of us so much, left this world way too early. and made Cumberland Valley into what it was, along with Bill Pierce and people like Sam Gruber, Tony Callistra, Michael Ward-Brenneman, and Dr. Tony Callistra again. Great people that I got to work with.
Okay, let's go back to when you were teachers, okay? Sam, you were a biology teacher.
Right.
When you started out, and you were at Cumberland Valley as a biology teacher?
Taught your brother.
Yeah, right, right. And then you were sociology. So did you teach any other classes?
I taught a course called, we had many courses back then, quarter courses. I taught a course called Marriage and the Family. At Camp Hill, I taught sociology and American history. So a variety of courses in the social science, social studies area.
So you taught marriage as a family in high school?
Yep, it was a course, it was a mini course.
Interesting.
We had quarter courses back then.
Okay. So talk about your years at Cumberland Valley then, and whenever, what you remember about being there, and then we'll move up to how it changed over the years while you were there. So.
Well, my appreciation for the school district goes back to what I learned about the formation of the school district. Because back in the early 50s, there were county school districts. And the Cumberland Valley schools students who resided in Hampton, Middlesex, Monroe, and Silver Spring Township all went to elementary school, grades 1 through 8. When they went to high school, they had to go to the closest surrounding school district, which could have been Carlisle, could have been Boiling Springs, East Pennsboro, Camp Hill, Mechanicsburg, the whole number of school districts surrounding our Cumberland Valley. And at that particular time, there were a total of 22 board members who decided that since they were board members in other school districts and they were there to be visually seen, but had no decision in setting tuition for the Cumberland Valley students, they decided to form and take a chance and form their own school district. And one of the first things that they did, and it's the thing I think I respect the most about district, rather than go one man, one vote, because back in those days, Hampton Township was the largest by far of the 4 townships. They decided that they want all townships to have equal representation. And you had then a format of 3 administrators in Hampton Township, or school board members, 3 school board members in Silver Spring Township, 3 school board members in Monroe and Middlesex Township. And they had to drop from 22 members down to 9 members. It was done without any kind of jealousy. It was done with what they thought was good for kids. And that's the format that has existed ever since the inception of the district. And I think that was the foundation for which the school district grew and became a much more largely populated school district. I can remember the largest club in Cumberland Valley when I went there was the Future Farmers of America. And it was basically known as Cal Valley by the surrounding districts until the educational program started to take off in the late 60s and early 70s. But the concept for forming the district was absolutely perfect. It existed then, it exists today, and it's the perfect foundation for our school district.
Butch?
Yeah, I was blessed to leave. I was blessed to be at Camp Hill, but when I came to Cumberland Valley High School, that high school was just built, I believe, a couple years in the early 70s.
73.
All right, and I think I came there in 73 and 74, and I was just wowed, overwhelmed, a brand new building, gigantic, great people. It was so different than Camp Hill, but I loved Camp Hill too. I had great mentors there, and I just saw, like Mr. Gruber said, I saw it grow. And we were very fortunate to have, for the most part, great kids. Kids that came from, I don't want to use well-to-do, but upper middle class families, were cooperative. as assistant principals, we were disciplinarians. We had some issues, but for the most part, we were blessed compared to colleagues in other school districts. And I hope along the way, and I know he did, that we made some differences. But then I saw the school really start to grow. And I remember Dr. Orr Brenneman coming to me around, I think it was 96 or 97, and he said to me, Butch, we're going to build another new high school, or we're going to add on to this high school. And he said, will you help write the educational specifications? And I thought to myself, what are educational specifications? But I knew that a little bit from my graduate studies. And we started planning the new high school. And it was probably one of the most challenging situations that I ever dealt with. High school principal was difficult, don't get me wrong. But building that high school around about 2,200 students, thinking we're going to have 2,600. I think they have 2,700 or 2,800 now. We tried to warn them that the demographic studies were incorrect. We talked a little bit, maybe even about two high schools like Cedar Cliff, West Shore, Redland, but we decided to build a house concept and have a 9th grade floor, a 10th grade floor, 11th grade floor, and a 12th grade floor. We called them houses. And in between, the concept was to have all the electives where they would come out of the houses and then go into the electives. And the houses was social studies, English, science, and math, based on what grades you were in. And it took us, I think we opened it around 2004. It took us almost 5 years to build. There was a great principal by the name of Dominic Cavallero, who I have no clue how he managed it. A lot of meetings, a lot of politics, growth, as Mr. Gruber said, in townships. We saw it was coming. Silver Springs, Monroe, Hampton was already huge. Middlesex was growing like crazy. It was the intersection of the Pennsylvania Turnpike in '81. The trucking business took off. Warehouses started to come in. And all of a sudden, Cumberland Valley became a gigantic school district. And a lot of us had some initial concern because we were afraid that because of the size, kids would be lost. That's why we went to that house concept and tried to build 4 different grades. Anyway, in the end, it worked out. After I retired from Cumberland Valley, I was fortunate to work part-time for Penn State, supervising student teachers and doing a little adjunct stuff. But I traveled to a lot of schools, and I saw a lot of different high schools. And we were blessed, both of us, to be in probably the best of the best, I think, in central Pennsylvania. So I understand now that they built just right out near him a new elementary school. It's open, right, Mr. Gruber?
Elementary and middle school.
And a new middle school that's going to open. So we saw the proliferation or the growth of one of the best. And I say that humbly. I say it proudly, but I say it humbly. I don't know in central Pennsylvania where you would get a better education than in Cumberland Valley. And that wasn't just us. We had a great faculty, so many wonderful teachers that went out of their way for so many students. And we have a lot of students that became doctors, lawyers, some of the best. So again, humbly, I was very fortunate to be there at the right time in the right place with the right people.
We do have there are some famous CV alums that came out of that school too, that I know of a few. Let's talk about the academics and some of the other teachers, your colleagues that you worked with, or let's talk about Cumberland Valley's academics, because it is strong in academically. So some of the classes and.
Well, we had a very strong academic program. There were levels of classes. We had AP courses, advanced placement courses, foreign language, German, French, Latin, and Spanish. We had a lot of college prep classes, high-level classes in college prep. I forget what they were called back then. You and I built the master schedule, and I can't remember the name.
Advanced placement courses?
Yeah, well, we did have them, yep. And again, we probably had more electives and offerings because of our size and because we had a good tax base. And I laugh back sometimes when I think that we had a taxpayers group that thought we were spending way too much money. But I think by far, and maybe you can help me, Mr. Gruber, I think our taxes in Cumberland Valley are still probably the lowest in Cumberland
The
County.
lowest in Cumberland County. And interestingly enough, we now have a superintendent who has gone to like the Silver Spring Business Council, Hampton Township Business Council, and is saying, what can we do to get kids job ready for you? So the priority that we put on academics for so many years is also shifting over to young people who may not go to college, but who may come out and get a good job. They have summer training programs. They partnership with the Votech School. They partnership with Penn State, Harrisburg. They have a lot of programs that get kids job ready. And some of those critics who were our biggest critics back when you and I were Cumberland Valley, now are the biggest supporters of the school district because of the initiative that the district take. You know, one other thing that I think is fair to mention is one of the great things about Cumberland Valley too is that they always allowed you to take initiatives. Nobody sat on top of you and said, this is the way things are. If you had an idea or a concept, they were always willing to experiment and try things. I can remember in '78, I sort of got bogged down after 8 years as an assistant principal, seeing the number of kids that dropped out of school. And they dropped out for different reasons. Some of it was back in '78, if a woman became pregnant, she had to drop out of school. Kids just didn't like school. There were a number of things that were happening. So they allowed us to start a high school diploma program where adults 18 years and older who have left the school without a diploma could come back and get a Cumberland Valley high school diploma, not a GED, but it was a program that made you accomplish in English and math the same things that our graduates were able to accomplish. And then it made them do a whole series of life skills, like to become CPR certified, to know the zoning laws in your township, to know how to get a building permit, to know how to get a library card. And we graduated over 2,000 adults with Cumberland Valley high school diplomas.
Is
And
that
we
from,
would,
from when to when? From 70?
this was from '78 until about 2014. And we would go to the senior class meetings and we would say, do you have a mother or a father or a grandfather or a grandmother who's never graduated? And they would graduate with the senior graduates. Or we would go to the middle school and say, do you see a student with real problems? Because probably those parents probably were not accomplished as far as their education was concerned. We got them to come back to school and get their diplomas, which helped to reduce the dropout rate. So the school district always allowed you to do things that were for the good of kids and never got in the way of anybody who they thought had a good idea. They were always supportive of staff, and I don't think I could have asked, and I know Butch feels the same way, we couldn't have asked for any better experiences in our life than what we experienced at Cumberland Valley. You know, financial pay is totally 100% irrelevant, but kids and what they do today and what they become means more to Butch and I than I think anything else associated with the school district.
Moving on, you know, the other thing that you mentioned here was the sports. And Cumberland Valley is known for its sports. You know, it's one, well, we could go back to the academics where even the FFA program, I believe, is one of the best in the state. My understanding is, or in the county. But the thing is with the sports, You said you coached basketball at Cumberland Valley, right, Sam? Okay, and then you did the football. So if you want to just talk about that and the other,
So that Butch puts the icing on the cake. I can remember starting out with X number of programs. And basically it was basketball, wrestling, football, and baseball. Then Title IX came in. And what I'd like Butch to do is expound, because we start out with X number of sports at Cumberland Valley, and now I think the program is about as extensive as it possibly can. And Butch had a lot to do with the expansion and was there and visually saw the number of new programs that we added with the school district.
Again, the emphasis has to be on academics.
right, exactly.
And that's the most important part. And as Mr. Gruber alluded to, we had some of the best teachers. And I hate to single certain people out. I'm going to say one name. Naomi DuPratt
Yep.
was the greatest English teacher that I've ever been around. And I could go on, and I don't want to say any more. But that was the number one purpose. But as Mr. Gruber mentioned, well, you talk about expansion of clubs, activities. I don't know if you've ever been back, Chris, to see the auditorium, to see the nauditorium, to see the weight rooms, to see the stadium. I mean, that was all part of a project that started in '97. And if you would have, talking about sports, Mr. Gruber's right. It was really football, basketball, wrestling, track, baseball. And then the women's sports took off. And it was something almost every night. Our aquatics team, water polo. Did I ever think we'd have an ice hockey team? A rugby team? Never. And now we got so many sports. And that's that's very great, because that gives something for almost everybody to be part of. And I think one of the challenges of being in a high school the size of Cumberland Valley is to belong. And the way to belong is to be part of a sport, an activity, whether it's the spring, the fall play, the spring musical, whether it's the choir, whether it's football again, or whatever it is. I think that helps. And I think a lot of our graduates, and I don't know what the percentage, I think it was back 75% went on at least to start college. And I think it really made a difference in their lives, because they went to colleges and they weren't lost. A lot of students that went from smaller high schools had a difficult time adjusting, but ours seemed to do really well. And Sam brought up a great point. To try now to provide educational opportunities for all kids to learn a skill, to learn a trade. Not everybody needs a BS or a BA. A lot of kids come out of colleges that cost $60,000 a year and can't find a job. And now we're looking at education differently, which I think is very important. And we do have a great superintendent. He's a good friend of Sam and ours. We knew him when he was principal at middle school in Boiling Springs. And Fred is doing a great job. So again, I don't mean to be redundant, but I think we were both fortunate to be in a school district at the right time, at the right place, with the right people.
I know you had mentioned Mrs. DuPratt, which was a wonderful English teacher, and there were just other teachers that were there. I know some of the favorites, I say that just from, were, Mrs. Scott was one, and, then Mr. Buck and Mr. Hoffman, those humanities teachers, which I kind of like go towards, but, And with that, the thing is, when you talk about the academics and the sports, if students do not make the academic grade and they want to play sports, then they are unable to play or whatever, correct?
Correct.
Can you want to talk a little bit about, how important the academic reach, that is compared to, whenever with playing sports, how important?
You're absolutely right. They had to maintain a certain average to participate. And I don't remember back then, but they had, academics, again, Chris, were the most important. The sports, obviously, I mean, I don't mean to say this the wrong way, but sometimes I get concerned about our society, because if you can shoot a basketball, hit a baseball out of the park, hit a golf ball 300 yards,
Sing
shoot
it.
400 par, or 1500 par for the week, act in a movie, you can make millions and billions of dollars. And what is it, again, it goes back to those things, sports, musicals, drama, everything is important. But again, that's for very few that are going to ever get to that level. It is a huge pyramid. We start here, even if we talk about athletics, a midget football program, till you get to the high school, till you get to the college, till you get to the pros, whether it's football, basketball, whatever it is. I mean, it's important. But again, only the few ever get to the top. So what we've always tried to do is, as Mr. Gruber said, is to provide an academic program and help everybody accomplish whatever they can accomplish. And part of it, no question, is drive, motivation. We saw kids that had a lot of ability that didn't use it, and we saw kids that didn't have much ability at all that went right to the top because they were willing to work hard and crazy. So those were probably the most rewarding things. And to me, the students were rewarding, but the people that, again, the colleagues, the Chapmans, the Pierces, the Brennemans, the Grubers, I hate to start naming people because I don't want to let the Callistras. They were the people that made Cumberland Valley what it is today.
Well, talking about athletics though, you can't, we can't really stop talking or not talk about the football team. Harry Chapman was one of the best coaches that I've ever seen play, or coach. And he was the guidance counselor. And, and I know there's a lot of good things that have been said about him, as a coach. And of course, when he was lost to us too early. I mean, he was even out there coaching from a wheelchair.
Yes.
So, just, your feelings, let's talk a little bit about Harry Chapman.
Well, if it wouldn't have been for Harry Chapman, Butch Bricker would have never made it to Cumberland Valley. And it's a funny story. I applied a year earlier, and Camp Hill was a good district. And I was a young teacher, and I thought, do I move or not? And he offered me the job, and Bill Pierce, the high school principal, said, okay, we're going to hire him. Well, I turned it down. But the next year I called Harry back and I said, I made a big mistake. I want to come back. And God love our good friend Bill Pierce. He said, I'm not hiring that guy back. He turned us down. And Harry convinced him to give me a second chance. So I got there and I coached from 73 to 78. In 78, I was lucky to join the ranks with Mr. Gruber as an assistant principal when you weren't allowed to coach. Then Harry became ill. And I don't know, was it around 1980 he was diagnosed
with cancer.
With cancer, somewhere around that.
His wife had just died of cancer prior to that.
Right. And because he was ill and he missed a year or two, another gentleman by the name of Robert Kroback, who coached with me, we came in and sort of helped out the program for a year or two while Harry started to recover. And like Mr. Gruber said, God bless that he lost his wife to cancer. They were both in their early 40s or mid 40s. They had two great kids, Ford Chapman, who was our quarterback for a year, Beth Chapman, who never really knew her mother. I think Beth was around 5 or 6. I remember Beth Chapman coming to our house. I can see her sitting in our family room on the couch asking my wife about her mother, because she never really knew her mother. And then Harry married Kathy Chapman, who was our secretary in the high school office.
Yeah, Kathy Green.
Yeah, and of course then poor Kathy lost Harry after a short period of time. But the last game that I got to coach with Harry was in November of 1987. And Cedar Cliff beat us 2-0 with a safety. But he was the best of the best. And then the following March in 1988, I'm almost pretty sure I'm right with these years, Chris, Harry lost the battle to cancer too. But he did develop the program. I will never forget, Harry had Sunday meetings. We had a meeting every Sunday. And the meeting started at 2 o'clock. And we watched film. I mean, Harry was way ahead of his time in terms of off-season programs, weightlifting, agility drills, getting people in shape. The first meeting I went to was a Sunday about mid-August of 1973, I think. We started the meeting at 2. I left there at 3:30 in the morning. That's how much we prepared for football games. Now, over the years, it got a little bit less and less. But he studied film. We had our team come up to the old TV studio. When they had a free period or study hall, they had better been in there watching film on our opponent. That's how dedicated he was. And as Mr. Gruber said, he took us from Cal Valley to Cumberland Valley. I think our first year we were 6-5, and then they did not have even district championships. Maybe they did. We won some district championships. I know because I still got the medals. But I think during Harry's time, I know we were ranked #1 in the state, even though we didn't have state championships. And Harry built us a great program. Then Coach Rimple came in. He served as a volunteer 1 year, the last year, and then he took over. And one of the nicest experiences, and Mr. Gruber and I went. We went to the state championship game up in Altoona, and we won the state championship in 1992. And that was under Coach Rimple. And of course, we had a great star by the name of
John Ritchie.
who went on to play at Michigan,
Stanford.
Stanford, and then Oakland and the Philadelphia Eagles. Had a great pro career, and took us to the state championship. We had good players that year, but I'm not sure we would have won it without John Ritchie. I remember a couple great runs that game. I remember the snow plowed around the stadium. Remember they had to clear the snow off, and I remember too, and this is sort of funny, the class of 92, 93 wanted to honor the class by putting up a sign, the state championship football sign that's right by the stadium. Well, guess what Silver Spring Township said? There's a sign ordinance, and you can't put up a sign. And this is sort of funny. I remember talking to some people who will be unknown, and I said, you don't want me to come to one of your Silver Springs Township's meetings with kids and parents who want to put that sign up. So they allowed us to do it. And it's a commemoration, you're talking about sports, to something that was very, very special. And again, as Mr. Gruber said, that took us to almost the pinnacle, that to be state champions in football, that's an accomplishment. And that's coaching. That was expenditures on weight rooms that were unbelievable, facilities that were unbelievable, dedicated kids that were unbelievable, and staff that were unbelievable, teaching and coaching.
Very good, yeah. I remember that.
And I could talk about the water polo team and state champions. I could talk about champions in swimming. We had state wrestling champions. The basketball program has been revitalized. Mr. Gruber's been a part of that indirectly and directly. He goes to all the games, and we have a pretty good record this year, right?
They had a very good season this year.
Yep.
Yeah. You want to elaborate on any of that, or any of the sports?
Yeah,
Not a
I
whole
don't
lot
think
to-
so.
Okay. Okay.
We really put too much stuff on sports, I think. We had enough on it, let's put it that way.
Let's go back then, and what do you want to, anything you want to share? You know, what was it like to grading? What was it like to correct those papers? You know, of students, and what stories do you have about students in the classroom, or lunches, or discipline? How were the students disciplined?
Well, we were able to be more direct with discipline. And I think discipline, whether back when we were administrators or even now, I think the key thing is that you draw lines for kids. And if the lines are reasonable and the kids know what they can cross and what they can't cross, I think young people still want to know, hey, what are the guidelines that we should follow or not follow? I don't think kids have changed as much as everybody thinks that kids have changed. I think what has happened is a lot of parents have changed. We had a lot of parents back in those days, if there were a problem, they were there and in the office with us, and we worked as a team and we rectified the problems. I can remember telling parents, hey, you come into school, don't tell me how to discipline in school, and I won't come into your house and tell you how to discipline your house. And that was something that parents totally recognized and worked with us on. But I think we were very fortunate to be at Cumberland Valley at the right time, and to see it grow from a small family and a community into the school district that it is today.
Okay, let's see. So you were there whenever they talk about the dome. Let's talk the dome, which is unique to the school.
Well, I could probably expound on that a little bit.
Okay.
Because it was in '73 that they built the first new addition to the high school. And I can remember, since I was the ex-basketball coach from '65 to '70, that I was involved in the helping to design the gymnasium. And we looked high and low and came up with that domed concept. And I do remember one of the things that I thought we should have done is have a scoreboard in the middle of the basketball court. But what I didn't realize, when they put that scoreboard in 1973, it was the third biggest scoreboard in the state of Pennsylvania. And the two that were bigger were in the Spectrum in Philadelphia and the Civic Center in Pittsburgh. But that gym yesterday, this weekend I was over for a playoff game with the Harrisburg basketball team. And now here we are in 2019. That dome gymnasium was built in 1973, and two fans from Harrisburg who are avid fans and made the comment to me. He says, you know, this is still the best basketball court in the area, and the best gymnasium in the area.
When I walked in the dome, I was overwhelmed. I never saw anything like that before. And like Mr. Gruber said, we were sort of a little bit known as the dome for a while too. And then when we redid the high school, obviously we redid that, and we redid the stadium. There were new regulations dealing with handicap issues. And it's, to me, one of the greatest places to go view any kind of athletic event. And I've heard former students, they'll talk about that. And now that they talk about the auditorium, I remember the planning that went into that auditorium, state of the art, unbelievable. And that auditorium, and I think, is the old pool now a weight room, or what is the old pool?
Yeah, it's now a weight room.
And that wrestling room became We built that big wrestling room, but I think that's a weight room now too.
Yeah. And I can remember when new transition was happening in '73 to form that new school building, the biggest issue for the community was the swimming pool. And I can remember the auditorium being filled up with half of the people wanting a swimming pool and half of the people thinking it was a total waste of taxpayer funds. And I think the unique thing about that is that swimming pool opens up at 6:30 in the morning and closes 11 o'clock at night. And probably in retrospect, that was one of the best decisions that school board made back when we built that new school. I call it the new school in 1973.
And again, I hate to, and I've already done it, single people, but there was a gentleman by the name of Dr. Gordon Myers, who was president of the Cumberland Valley School District and was a powerful force in the development of that facility and maintaining that facility. And very close to Coach Chapman, very close to Coach Chapman. And again, if it wouldn't have been for gentlemen like him and many others, Cumberland Valley wouldn't be what it is today.
He had a buddy, his name was Jim Thomas, and it was the team of Jim Thomas and Dr. Myers.
That's right.
That pushed everything. They looked at it as what's good for kids. And that was their whole foundation for their belief process.
Well, the size of Cumberland Valley, one of the best schools in the county, and a lot of people, that's what they look for, and coming to when they move to this area. And one of those things with Cumberland Valley, of course, is first when you look at why parents choose that school, it is the academics, that it's academically strong, and then the programs that it offers. So when you started teaching there, what was how did the programs expand? What did you see started out as a handful of programs to what it is today?
Well, there were a lot of, I left a small high school, a very good high school. Camp Hill was well known. Well, you lived in the Camp Hill School District back then, I think, right?
Yeah.
And we had academic programs, but we didn't have 4 languages at Camp Hill. We had levels of science. We had levels of chemistry and physics, biology 1, biology 2. We had a funny story I'll never forget. When I was principal, I got a call Thanksgiving morning from a custodian. He said, "Butch, a boa got out in the science lab and he's hanging up in the rafters." And I think I took Joe Coriel, who was a good friend of ours, assistant principal, a co-coach, in with me because I thought, what am I going to do with the snake? I don't know how big he was. And they had a variety of different animals, as Mr. Gruber knows. So, and he was hooked up in the rafters, and we pulled on his tail and put the trash can on the other side. Finally gave up, and he came down in the trash can. I say that because it's funny, but I also say that because we had an extensive science lab, an extensive science program as just one area, as was English, social studies, math, science, phys ed. I saw changes in phys ed. He mentioned the adult education program, and I taught 2 of his classes. I won't tell you what they were, but he had an extensive program there. And again, it went back to trying to do what was best for kids. And I remember, and I'm sure he remembers, boy, when we had an opening, we had applications galore because people wanted to come. Yeah. So we were fortunate to get really good teachers. And again, the teachers, the board members, the students were what made Cumberland Valley what Cumberland Valley was.
Cumberland Valley wouldn't be Cumberland Valley without those people.
Right.
Is there any other stories that you can think of that's kind of comical or hard?
I can think of a tragic one. One of the most challenging things that ever happened at least when I was there, we had a pep rally, and we had a sophomore girl. All of a sudden, she passed out. I'll never forget, kids screaming. We're in the middle of a pep rally. We got everybody in the school in the gym, all the students, all the faculty. And I'm not going to mention her name, but she had a cardiac arrest. We tried to do CPR. The nurses were there. We had a defibrillator. I remember holding the school buses so that we could get the ambulance there and took her. And by the time we got her to the hospital, she was pretty much gone. I remember meeting the parents, and that was probably the most challenging situation that I remember. In the late 80s, we formed what was called Student Assistance, which was a program designed to help students who had drug and alcohol issues or mental health issues. And that became a statewide program, and we were one of the first schools to have that initiative, to have a student assistance program. And one of the reasons we got involved in that was student suicide. And that started to get a little out of hand, and we all know about that today, but Cumberland Valley was one of the first to deal with that too. But that was a difficult situation. We all faced situations. We had some tragic accidents where we lost students, and we had support groups to come in to help them. But with the size of a school district like that, sad, tragic things happen. But people bounce back. We lost some great teachers too.
No, you talk about educational changes. The one thing I think of is when I first started in administration in '71, if a young person missed 10 days of school and you couldn't account for those absences, they were before a judge up here in the Cumberland County Court. And the judge would tell them, you either go to school or you're going to be incarcerated in some type of an educational program that we've created through the county. And now, that type of a situation would never happen anymore because there have been so many changes in education. But that was like one of the basic concepts when we first started out. And I remember being up here many a time before probation and a judge and, working with a young person just because they had been absent from school for a small number of days.
And I think one of our real special programs were for our special needs students. We had a great faculty there. We built a high school where actually, and I'm not sure whether it still exists because I know a lot of things have been taken over because of the growth in the student population. But we built an apartment. It was actually an apartment where the kids could learn practical skills on how to take care of themselves. And we had a state-of-the-art TV studio. I'm not sure that exists anymore either. We had a distance learning center because from my understanding, again, with the growth of the Cumberland Valley population, things happened. And that happened when you and I were there. We're there too. We built a alternative ed program into the new high school. It was a separate wing down by the gym. It was staffed by 2 teachers and a probation officer. And those were kids that had a difficult time making it, like Mr. Gruber's talking about, that couldn't survive in a normal classroom environment. So there might have been 8 or 10 or 12, and before we built that, we outsourced those programs. And that was expensive for the district. I don't remember the number, but like Mr. Gruber said, if they couldn't survive in the regular classroom, we sent them somewhere else, especially if they had to go, because if they weren't 17 or 18, what was the age that you could drop out of school?
16 if parents signed you out. Okay. 18 you could drop out on your own.
Okay. And so we built that, and it's my understanding that has been taken over by Classroom now too, and maybe they're outsourcing. But for the most part, I have to say, again, we had so many good kids that followed rules, and we had so many supportive parents. we had a gentleman that just passed away, and again, I shouldn't mention, but his name was Henry Ferry. He was director of guidance at one time,
Pupil services then.
and right, student services, and then he became a home and school visitor. And he went out to homes and helped our needy families. And I'll never forget, and the gentleman just passed away, what a great man. He went away or became ill, and I took over for about a month. And what a dichotomy I never believed existed, that we had a kid living in a basement on a ground floor, no cement. That's where he slept at night. But people like Mr. Ferry did so much to help that small element of students that I never knew existed in Cumberland Valley, and we had them, and every school district does. But again, I guess I want to commend certain staff, all staff, for what they did for our school district.
And the only thing that I would really have to add is I think a lot of the success too of the school district is because of the school community. 70% of residents don't have kids in school, but the community has been tremendously supportive, started programs, has become involved with the school district, have done many, many things for kids, have done many things to set up educational programs, activities for young people, and a continuation of the program that Mr. Brooker talked about, where supportive of people in need. And I just think we're very lucky to be part of a very good school community.
With the students in need, Cumberland Valley has programs. They have
Kick in for kids.
yeah. There's different programs that they have, like around the holidays or whatever, too. And when did those programs start? When do you?
Mr. Ferry came to the parent, when back in the 90s, we had a high school parent advisory committee. And Mr. Ferry came there and talked to the high school advisory committee about starting a fund to help people in need, kids in need. And that took off, and then Mr. Charlie Brown, who taught psychology for so many years, took it over. And it still exists. They just had a big fundraiser this past January where they have it out at Rich Valley Golf, and they have auctions, and people donate money, and it goes to help kids and in need. But we have many clubs that helped out kids too. Do I remember exactly? No, at this point, but I know they benefited the less fortunate.
Well, even the local police individuals from the 4 townships run programs for kids at Christmas. So there's a tremendous amount of community support for our young people and for all people that maybe have needs, economic needs and other kinds of needs at this point.
Well, I know there was like elementary schools, and I don't know if they did this at the high school level, but at the elementary schools, they would even have, like during the holidays, they would have food brought in, cans of food and different things like that, to help for that.
I think there were clubs at the high school that did some of
did.
that too.
Yeah, and we really spoke from a high school perspective,
Right.
because the elementary perspective is a whole situation again.
Right, right. And the high school, the grades are from ninth to 12th, correct?
Right.
Okay. So it went from, what would you say when you started back in the early 70s, about how many students were there in the school compared to?
Well, when I came to coach basketball in '65, we had classes of less than 300. And by '76, the classes got up to 500, 600 students per class. So the growth was rapid and continuous.
The high school that we built was designed for 650 a class. my understanding is we have more than 650 a class now. I think one of the challenges in the classroom was class size to be a little, because I remember having classes of 35 students. At Camp Hill, I had a class of 15. And they weren't all that way. Science classes were limited to 24 because of lab situations and stuff. But as Mr. Gruber alluded, we just took off and grew like crazy. And I've always lived in Carlisle. Our kids went through Carlisle. I didn't think it was a good idea for their dad to be in the same school as them. But and Carlisle's a great school district, but and with great people, but they didn't have a lot of the things that Cumberland Valley had.
Okay,
Yeah.
Brady,
We're getting redundant.
thank you.